I was pulling drywall off the back wall of my own garage when a metal box dropped out and hit the concrete floor, with a sound that I still hear sometimes when the house gets too quiet. It was sealed shut with electrical tape wound around it 3 times, the kind of careful wrapping you do when you don't want something to come loose by accident. Inside was an envelope of cash, a prepaid SIM card in a sandwich bag, and a stack of documents with my signature on them. My own name, in my own handwriting on papers I had never seen before in my life. I'm 64 years old. I live in Barrie, Ontario, about 90 minutes north of Toronto, in the same house I've owned for 26 years. I built that garage myself in 2003 with my neighbor Dave, and a case of Canadian and 3 weekends in October. And what I'm about to tell you started the same way everything in my life starts, as something simple. I wanted to add insulation to the back wall before winter came in hard. That was it. That was the whole plan. My name is Raymond Cole, and in the time it took me to pull 1 sheet of drywall away from a stud, I found out that the woman I married 31 years ago had been building a way out of our life together, and she had been doing it for longer than I wanted to believe. If you've listened to stories on this channel before, you know I don't rush. I let things sit the way they need to. Because what happened to me in that garage on a Saturday morning in November is the kind of thing that sneaks up on a person. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick the door in. It just falls out of the wall and lands on your concrete floor and stares up at you in the cold morning light. So put the kettle on, get comfortable, and listen to this carefully, because I promise you, by the time we're done, you are going to think about someone in your own life differently. My wife Sandra and I, Sandra Cole, had been married since 1993. We met at a New Year's party at a mutual friend's place in Sudbury. She was 28, I was 33. She laughed at something I said and I thought, that's the one. That's how it works sometimes. 31 years later, I'm standing in my garage holding a box that tells me I didn't know her at all. Sandra worked in bookkeeping. 20 years with the same firm in Barrie, the kind of job where you know where every dollar is supposed to be, and you know how to move numbers from one column to another without anyone asking questions. I worked trades my whole career, electrical, mostly commercial, and retired 3 years ago at 61 with a pension from IBW Local 115 that I am proud of. We weren't rich, we were solid. The mortgage was paid, we had RRSPs, we had the house. We had the plan most people our age have, which is to get through the next few years quietly and come out the other side with enough left to breathe. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. We weren't falling apart. We weren't fighting. There was no screaming, no cold shoulders, nothing obvious. If anything, the last year had felt almost too calm. Sandra was attentive in a way she hadn't been in a while. She asked about my pension details twice in the spring, framed it as concern, as wanting to make sure everything was in order. She was the one who brought up the idea of putting the house in a joint trust. Said her cousin Darius, she called him Darius, he'd shortened it when he moved out west, said it was smart estate planning. I nodded, I said we'd look into it. I stopped asking. That's on me. The Saturday it happened was the second weekend of November. Sandra had driven down to Guelph to spend the weekend with her sister Marisol. I had the house to myself, which is a thing I've never minded. I like the quiet of a house when there's no one else in it. I had coffee going by 7, had the radio on in the garage by 7:30. CBC Radio 1, the way I've done it every Saturday for 20 years, and I was pulling old drywall off the back wall with a flat bar, planning to pack the whole thing with Roxwool before the cold really set in. The wall came apart in sections the way old drywall does, dusty at the edges, and the third sheet I pulled came away from the studs with a hollow snap, and something tumbled out of the cavity between the insulation and the back of the board and dropped straight down to the floor. I thought it was a mouse nest at first. There are field mice every autumn looking for warmth, and I'd had them in the walls before. But the sound was wrong, too heavy, solid. I looked down and saw a metal box, the kind you'd find at a dollar store or a Canadian Tire clearance bin, gray, rectangular, maybe the size of a thick paperback, and wound around it 3 careful loops of black electrical tape. I stood there in my garage with insulation dust on my face, and the flat bar still in my hand, and I looked at that box for a long moment before I picked it up. I want you to picture it. 64 years old, sawdust in your hair, CHBC morning show murmuring from the radio on the workbench, and a box in your hands that has no business being behind your drywall. My first thought, and I want to be honest about this, was that maybe it was mine. Maybe I'd hidden something years ago and forgotten. That happens to a man who's lived in the same house for 26 years. You tuck things away and the house absorbs them. But I knew before I even finished the thought that it wasn't mine. The tape was too new. The edges of it hadn't yellowed or dried the way tape does after a decade. This had been put here recently, deliberately. I set the flat bar down on my workbench and I peeled the tape back slowly. Inside was a plain white envelope, unsealed, folded twice around a stack of $100 bills. I didn't count them right away. I could see there were a lot of them. Underneath the envelope was a small sandwich bag with a prepaid SIM card inside. The kind you buy at a Dollarama or a Shoppers Drug Mart with cash, the kind that doesn't ask your name. And underneath that was a stack of papers, folded together, stapled at the corner. I unfolded them and saw my own signature at the bottom of the first page. Raymond Cole, my middle name included. In my own handwriting, I had never seen that document in my life. It was a quitclaim form for the property. Our house, our address on Dunlop Street West. My signature was on it, Sandra's was on it. And in the date field at the top, a date 3 weeks from that Saturday. I sat down on the garage floor. Not because my knees went out, though they're not what they were. I sat down because my brain needed a moment to catch up to what my hands were holding. You build something for 26 years, and then you hold a piece of paper that says you already agreed to sign it over, and your body just goes still. That's the only word for it. Still. I set the papers face down on the floor and looked up at the hole in my wall where the box had come from. The insulation was pink and undisturbed around the edges. Whoever put this in there had been careful. Lifted one section, tucked the box in, replaced everything, put the drywall back. You'd never know unless you were the one doing the demo yourself. Sandra had asked me twice over the summer whether I'd gotten around to the garage project yet. I'd said soon, I'd said before winter, I'd said I'd get to it. She never pushed, she just asked, light and casual, the way you ask about something you already know the answer to. I turned the papers back over. The quitclaim form had a transfer instruction attached. The property would be transferred to a numbered company, 2741983 Ontario Inc., registered in March, this past March. I thought about March. I was in Vancouver in March visiting my son Caleb, 8 days. First time I'd flown anywhere since before the pandemic. I thought about who would have had 8 days alone in this house in March. The prepaid SIM card had a number written on the back in permanent marker. 7 digits, no area code. Like someone who'd written it in a hurry and assumed they'd remember the rest. I didn't open anything else right away. I just sat there on my concrete floor, the same floor I'd poured myself in 2003. And I thought about what kind of care goes into something like this. Not an impulse, not a fight. This was planned across months. Months of patience and precision and coming to bed at night like nothing was different. I put everything back in the box. I went inside. I made fresh coffee even though I'd already had 2 cups and I didn't need a third. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. At the maple I planted when we moved in that was now taller than the roofline. And I tried to think clearly. The first person I called was my son Caleb. Caleb lives in Coquitlam now, works in project management for a construction firm out there. He's 33. He's got his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which I mean as the highest compliment for both traits. He picked up on the second ring. Hey Dad, what's up? I almost said nothing. Almost said I just wanted to chat. How's the weather out west? How's his partner Damon doing? The lie was right there. 31 years of not wanting to cause worry in the people around me, and the instinct to protect them from bad news dies hard. But I looked at the box sitting on my kitchen island and I said, Caleb, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to just listen for a minute. He listened. I told him about the wall, the box, the papers. I read him the name on the numbered company. I told him about the SIM card. I read him my own signature on a document I'd never signed. He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is doing something with what they've just heard. Dad, he said finally, don't touch anything, don't move anything, and don't say a word to Mom, I know. I'm serious. Not a word. Not even a no, son. Another pause. Is she home? Guelph, back tomorrow night, okay. I could hear him breathing. Call Uncle Pete. Uncle Pete is my older brother Martin's nickname since Caleb was 5 years old. Long story, wrong order of events at a birthday party, the name stuck. Martin is 68, retired from 32 years in the OPP. He worked financial crimes for the last 12 of them before he handed in his badge and moved to Wasaga Beach. He is the kind of man who says less than he knows and knows considerably more than he says. I called him right after I hung up with Caleb. He picked up on the third ring. I could hear the lake in the background the way you can hear wind off Georgian Bay even when it's not loud. Raymond. You all right? Not entirely, I said. Tell me. So I told him. The same way I'd told Caleb, but slower, because Martin's the kind of listener who stops you if you go too fast. When I got to the quitclaim form, he said, read me the company number again. I read it, a pause. And your signature. You're certain it's yours. It looks like mine, down to the way I do the R. But Martin, I never signed anything like this, I would remember. A longer pause this time. The kind I recognized from the few times in my life Martin had to deliver news that didn't have a good side. Raymond, he said. A signature that looks exactly like yours on a document you didn't sign isn't a clerical error. You understand what I'm telling you? I understood. The numbered company, he said. I'm going to make a couple of calls, quietly. Don't do anything until you hear from me, and for the love of God, act normal when she gets home. I said I would. I hung up and stood in my kitchen in the November light and thought about all the times Sandra had sat across from me at that table. 31 years of breakfasts, of bad days, of good ones, of the nothing conversations that hold a life together. The way she always took her coffee with oat milk because she'd given up dairy years ago. The way she hummed to herself when she was unloading the dishwasher. These were real things. These had been real. I went back to the garage and took photographs of everything. The box, the tape, the position of the cavity in the wall, the quitclaim form, every page, the transfer instructions, the numbered company, the SIM card, and the number on the back. I sent them all to my own email from my phone. Then I drove to the Staples on Bayfield and had copies made and drove across town and dropped them at my neighbor Dave's house. Same Dave who helped me build that garage, and asked him to hold an envelope for me without asking why. Dave's been my neighbor for 20 years. He took the envelope without a word. That's the kind of neighbor he is. I made pasta for dinner that night. I watched the Leafs lose, which they did, which they have a talent for. I went to bed before 11. I lay in the dark and thought about the word that kept circling back to me, the one I couldn't shake. Signature. My signature, on papers I had never touched. Which means one of two things. Either someone had forged it, which is a criminal matter, or someone had put a paper in front of me that I'd signed without reading carefully, buried inside something longer, something routine. I went back through my memory of every document Sandra had brought home in the past year. Pension update forms. A new insurance policy on the car. The proposed trust she'd mentioned back in May. I had glanced at it. She'd said she was still getting the paperwork sorted. It never came up again. I thought about May. I thought about the trust. I thought about what Caleb had said the last time he was home in the summer, offhand, not meaning anything by it. Mom seems really focused on financial stuff lately. Did you guys hire someone? I had laughed it off. Said she was just being thorough. I hadn't thought about it again until now. Martin called Sunday morning while Sandra was still in Guelph. The numbered company, he said, was incorporated in March. One director listed, not Sandra, not you. A man named Darius Kowalczyk. Sandra's cousin Darius, the one who had told her joint trusts were smart estate planning. He's been in real estate investment out in Alberta, Martin said. Small operations mostly. A couple of properties in the Red Deer area. Nothing dramatic. But Raymond, and I want you to hear this carefully, there's a complaint on record with the Alberta Securities Commission from 2021. A client alleged unauthorized transfer of property title. No charges were laid. The file was closed. I let that sit for a moment. He's done this before, I said. He's been close to it before, Martin said, the way a man who spent 12 years in financial crimes chooses his words carefully, which is different. But close is close, Martin. The documents with my signature. I know, he said. I know what you're thinking, and you need a lawyer before you do anything else. A real estate lawyer and a family lawyer, and you need them tomorrow. Not a referral from a friend. Someone who handles matrimonial property and fraud. He gave me a name. Barbara Enkemdirim, downtown Barrie. Former Crown attorney, now private practice. He said she was the kind of lawyer who didn't need anything explained twice. I called her office first thing Monday morning and had an appointment for Tuesday. Sunday evening, Sandra pulled into the driveway at 7:30. I heard the familiar sound of her tires on the gravel, the way they crunched slightly at the last turn into the garage. The same way she's done it for 26 years in this house. Some things stay the same even when everything else is changing around them. I had dinner ready. Chicken and roasted vegetables. A bottle of Pinot Gris she liked from the LCBO on Dunlop. I was standing at the stove when she came in the side door with her overnight bag, cheeks cold from the November air, hair down the way she wore it when she'd been relaxed. Smells good, she said, and kissed me on the cheek the way she's done 10,000 times. Quick, familiar, part of the rhythm. How was Marisol? Good, tired. The kids are a handful. She set her bag down and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. Did you get to the garage at all? There it was. Casual as breathing. The same question she'd been asking since June. Pulled some drywall, I said, turning back to the stove. Found some mouse evidence behind one section. Going to need to deal with that before I insulate. A half-second pause behind me. Not long, not dramatic. Just the half-second a person needs when an answer isn't the one they were expecting. Oh, she said. Well, no rush. Winter's already here. No rush at all, I said, and I plated the chicken. We ate dinner. She talked about Marisol's youngest and his hockey schedule. I talked about the Leafs. She poured herself a second glass of wine and I watched her hands on the bottle, and thought about those hands signing our names to documents in a room I'd never been in. Her phone, face down on the counter, vibrated twice during dinner. She didn't reach for it. After dinner, she said she was tired from the drive and went to bed early. I said I'd be up soon. I sat alone at the kitchen table with my tea and listened to her move through the upstairs. The sound of water running, the familiar creak of the third step on the stairs, the bedroom door pulling shut. I picked up the burner SIM card from where I'd tucked it into my jacket pocket. I didn't have a phone to put it in, but I had already looked up the number written on the back. It traced to a personal cell registered to a billing address in Red Deer, Alberta. Darius Kulchik, Darius. The cousin who suggested the trust. I met with Barbara in Camdirim on Tuesday morning. Her office was on Collier Street, second floor. The kind of space that looks like someone's library. Books actually read, not bought by the meter for the look of them. She was in her early 50s, unhurried, and she listened to everything I said without writing a word until I was finished. Then she picked up her pen. "The quitclaim form," she said. "You have photographs. And copies, off-site." She nodded once, the way someone nods when they're already a step ahead. "The numbered company is registered in Ontario, which means Ontario Land Registry applies. A transfer to that entity without your clear, verified, witnessed consent is not enforceable. But the fact that someone attempted to create documentation suggesting that consent exists, that's a different matter." "What kind of matter?" "Potentially fraud. Potentially forgery. That determination isn't mine to make. That's the OPP." She looked at me directly. "Do you want to pursue this quietly, through civil process, or do you want it documented criminally?" I thought about Martin, about the complaint in Alberta with no charges, about Darius and the client in Red Deer and the file that got closed. "I want it documented," I said. "All right," she made a note. "Here's what I'd like you to do. Don't move any assets. Don't change any accounts. Don't confront your wife. Let me make some calls and let this move the way it should move. If you act now out of emotion, she has time to make things disappear. If you wait one more week, we hold everything." I'd heard this already from Martin, from Caleb. But hearing it from a lawyer made it land differently. Heavier. More final. "One more week," I said. "One more week. Can you do that?" I thought about Sunday dinner, the chicken and the Pinot Gris. The sound of her tires on the gravel. "I've been doing it for longer than a week," I said. "I just didn't know it." She looked at me for a moment. "Just a moment." "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole." "So am I said. "I want to stop here for a minute because I think there's something that needs to be said to anyone listening who is in a marriage where your spouse handles most of the financial decisions. I am not talking about trust. Trust is necessary. I'm talking about awareness. There's a difference. I had handed most of the financial administration to Sandra over the years because she was good at it and I wasn't interested and it seemed efficient. I trusted her. That was not the mistake. The mistake was in not staying aware, not asking questions, not knowing where things were and what they were called and who held them. In Canada, your primary residence is protected under provincial family law. In Ontario, it's covered under the Family Law Act. Both spouses have equal rights to possession of the matrimonial home, regardless of whose name is on title. That means the quitclaim document, even with my signature on it, was on shaky legal ground from the start. But I didn't know that. I hadn't known it, and Darius was counting on the fact that I wouldn't. You can request a title search on your own property from the Ontario Land Registry for less than $30. You can put a fraud alert on your property title through the Ontario government's Property Alert Service for free. It will email you anytime someone registers a document against your property. I did not know this service existed until Barbara in Camdirim told me about it. I've had the alert set up since that Tuesday. If you own property in Canada, I want you to do 2 things after this. 1. Look up your provincial land registry and confirm what's on title right now. 2. Set up whatever property alert service your province offers, because most of them have one. This is not paranoia. This is the same thing as checking your smoke alarm. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I went to the grocery store. I watched the news. I raked the last of the leaves off the back lawn. Sandra and I made dinner together twice. She brought up the trust again gently on Thursday evening. Said Darius had sent some updated documents for us to look at. She slid a folder across the counter toward me. "No rush," she said. "But he's wondering if we might be able to get together before the end of the month. He'll be in Toronto the week before Christmas." "That could work," I said. "Let's set something up." She smiled. "I think it'll be good for us, Ray. Get everything organized." I nodded. "I think you're right." I said the words and I meant none of them, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. Martin had said the same thing Frank Delgado had said to Walter in Phoenix. The same wisdom that's probably been said in 100 different kitchens to 100 different husbands and wives who found the box behind the wall. Your composure is the only thing you have right now. Use it. I called Caleb every other evening that week, once he was home from work and Damon had gone to bed. I told him what Barbara had said. I told him about the property alert service I'd set up. He was quiet in the way he gets when he's scared but doesn't want to show it, which he got from me, and I'm not proud of passing that on. "Dad," he said on the Thursday, "are you okay? Like actually okay?" I thought about that for a moment. I was sitting in my truck in the driveway, engine off, looking at the garage through the windshield. "I will be," I said. "I think I will be. I want to fly home. Not yet. Let it play out, Dad, Caleb." I kept my voice steady. "Let Barbara do her job. When it's done, you can come home and we'll eat too much and watch bad hockey and you can tell me I should move somewhere warmer." "Okay?" A breath. "Okay, I love you, son." "Love you too, Dad. Call me tomorrow." The meeting with Darius was set for the second Saturday in December. Sandra had booked a boardroom at a hotel near Pearson, said it was easier than driving downtown. Darius was flying in from Red Deer. She'd made it sound like a routine financial planning session, the kind of thing sensible retired couples do. She'd even mentioned that we might want to think about giving Caleb some of the equity as an early inheritance. Said it was something she'd read about. Something more and more couples were doing. I heard the plan behind it. Moving assets into Caleb's name was another way to move them out of mine. I didn't say any of that. I said it sounded thoughtful. I said Caleb would appreciate it. The morning of the meeting, I was up at 6. Sandra was still asleep. I stood in the kitchen and drank my coffee and thought about the maple in the backyard, and the garage I'd built with Dave, and the way that house had held our life together for 26 years. Whatever it was going to be after today, it was going to be different. I'd made peace with that somewhere in the middle of that long, quiet week. We drove down together in Sandra's car. She wasn't in a good mood, chatty about the weather, about Caleb, about nothing in particular. The way a person is when they think a thing is about to be resolved. We parked at the hotel and walked in together, and I held the door for her the way I've always done. The boardroom was on the second floor. Darius Kowalczyk was already there when we walked in. Mid-50s, silver hair, the kind of jacket that cost more than it looked. He stood up when we entered and came around the table with his hand extended and a smile that was doing a great deal of work. "Raymond," he said. "So good to finally meet you in person." I shook his hand. Firm, dry. A hand that wasn't surprised by anything. He turned to Sandra. "Sandra, you look wonderful." And there was something in that, something in the familiarity of it, that settled like a stone in the bottom of my stomach. We sat down. Darius opened his laptop, had slides prepared. He walked through a presentation on estate planning, on equity extraction, on the benefits of holding property through a numbered company for liability protection. He was smooth. Practiced. He clearly knew his material well enough that it almost sounded reasonable. He slid a folder across the table. "Just some preliminary documents for your review, Raymond. No pressure today. Sandra's already had a look." I put my hand flat on the folder. I let a moment pass. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and set the photographs on the table between us. The box, the cavity in the wall, the quitclaim form, the numbered company registration. Darius looked down at the photographs, then up at me. Sandra looked down at the photographs. "Raymond," she started. "I found it," I said quietly, "when I was pulling drywall in the garage. The room went the way rooms go when something irreversible has entered them. Not loud, just altered." "Where did you get those?" Darius said. Not a question. A man doing arithmetic. "Same place you put them," I said. I kept my voice level. I had practiced this too in my bathroom mirror for the better part of a week. "Behind the drywall on the back wall of my garage." "You want to tell me how documents with my signature got into a sealed box in my own wall? Or would you like to explain that to the OPP? His jaw shifted, just slightly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's a complaint on record with the Alberta Securities Commission about an unauthorized title transfer," I said. 2021. The file was closed, but it was opened. I think that's relevant here. Darius looked at Sandra, and in that look was everything I needed to know about what this had been and how long it had been going on. Sandra looked at me. "You went through my things." "I was renovating my garage," I said. "Things fell out of the wall." She held my gaze for a moment, and then she did something I didn't expect. She exhaled. Long, slow, like she'd been holding it for months. And when she spoke, her voice was flat and tired in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "How much do you know?" "All of it," I said. "The SIM card, the number in Red Deer, the incorporation date in March, the quitclaim form, all of it." Silence. Darius pushed his chair back and began to close his laptop. "I think I'm going to step out and call." The door opened. Barbara and Kemdiram walked in with a second woman I didn't recognize. Younger, in a dark coat, carrying a file folder. Barbara introduced her as a representative from the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General. She set her own folder on the table and looked at Darius with the kind of patience that has no warmth in it. "Mr. Kowalczyk," she said, "we'd like to discuss the numbered company, the property transfer documentation, and the prepaid SIM card registered to your billing address in Alberta. You're welcome to contact your own counsel before we proceed." That's entirely your right. Darius's composure, which had been very good, went out of him like air from a tire. Not all at once. Just steadily until there wasn't much left of it. He stood. I'm going to have to end this. Of course, Barbara said. But this conversation will continue. Today or another day the documentation exists. He walked out. Didn't say another word to Sandra. Didn't look at her. Just left. Sandra sat very still. I looked at her from across the table for a long moment. 31 years of mornings. The maple tree. The garage. All of it sitting between us in that borrowed boardroom at a hotel near the highway. How long? I said. She looked at the table. Darius and I were together. Before you. Years before. And then we weren't, and then I met you, and that was real, Raymond. I want you to know it was real, but... She pressed her lips together. He came back into contact 2 years ago. He had the plan, and I was tired. I was tired, and I wasn't thinking clearly, and I made choices I can't undo now. No, I said. You can't. What happens now? Barbara answered before I could. Now your accounts are frozen pending investigation. The numbered company has been flagged with the Ontario Land Registry. And we'd like to have a longer conversation, Mrs. Cole, about your level of participation in this and whether cooperation would be in your interest. Sandra nodded. Just once. A small motion, like a person who has run out of options and knows it. She didn't look at me again before she left. I drove home alone that evening. The 400 northbound in December, the lights of Barrie coming up through the dark and the cold and the snow that had started falling somewhere around Cookstown. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, before going inside. I looked at the garage. I thought about the wall I'd torn open. I thought about the box on the floor. I thought about the sound it had made when it hit the concrete. That evening I called Caleb. He answered before the first ring had finished, which meant he'd been waiting. Dad. It's done, I said. A pause. Are you okay? I looked around my kitchen. The table where we'd eaten 10,000 meals. The window above the sink where I could see the maple in the backyard, bare now in December, holding the snow on its branches the way a tree that's been there long enough learns to hold things. I'm going to be, I said. Come home for Christmas. Already booked, he said, and I could hear him smiling. Damon's making peerages. I laughed. It surprised me. But it came out real. The garage wall has new insulation now. Roxol 2 layers, packed in properly the way I planned to do it back in November. The drywall goes up next weekend, and Dave said he'd come over and help, and I told him I'd get in a case of something decent since we're not 25 anymore and deserve better than Canadian. The new wall is clean. Solid. Nothing behind it but warmth. Here's what I want to say to you before I go, and I mean this the way one person means something to another when there's no performance involved. Financial abuse in long-term relationships is one of the quietest and most common forms of harm there is, and in Canada it is growing, particularly among people over 60. The National Initiative for the Care of the Elderly has documented it. So has the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. It doesn't always look like what happened to me. Sometimes it looks like a child gradually taking over a parent's accounts. Sometimes it looks like a spouse quietly redirecting pension deposits. Sometimes it looks like a document slipped into a stack of papers on a Tuesday evening at the kitchen table. There are things you can do. You can set up a property alert through your provincial land registry. You can pull your credit report from Equifax or TransUnion. Both are free once a year in Canada. You can call Service Canada to confirm your CPPP and OAS records haven't been tampered with. These are things no one tells you about until it's too late. So I'm telling you now. And here's the one thing I want you to actually do this week. Call your bank and ask them to walk you through every account attached to your name. Every single one. Not the total, the accounts. If there's one you don't recognize, ask about it out loud right then. You are not paranoid. You are paying attention. There is a difference. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Comment 1 if you think Raymond did the right thing by waiting and building the case instead of confronting Sandra right away. Comment 2 if you think Sandra deserved a chance to explain herself before he involved lawyers and investigators. Comment 3 if you've ever found something in your own home. Something small. Something that shouldn't have been there. That changed how you understood the person you were living with. And underneath your number, tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your province, what time it is there right now. I read every single one of these. A kitchen in Winnipeg at midnight and a porch in Cape Breton on a Sunday morning are both good places to be. Tell me where you are. If this story stayed with you, take 1 second and hit the like button. It tells the algorithm to put this in front of someone who needs to hear it tonight. Maybe someone who's been ignoring a feeling in their gut for too long. Maybe someone who's been nodding along at the kitchen table and stopped asking questions. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Real human stories about trust, about the long, slow work of betrayal, and about the moment a person decides to stop sleeping through their own life. This is a fictional story, written and produced here for this channel, inspired by documented patterns in elder financial fraud and matrimonial asset fraud cases reported across Canada. The names, characters, and specific events are entirely my own creation. If anything in this story felt too close to your real situation, please reach out to a family law attorney in your province, to your local adult protective services, or to the Canadian Centre for Elder Law at centreforelderlaw.ca. You are not alone, and you are not too late. Sometimes the truth doesn't come in a confrontation. Sometimes it just falls out of the wall on a quiet Saturday morning when the radio is on and you weren't even looking for it. So look, pay attention, stay awake, and I'll see you in the next story.